Greetings and hello, I am Kaiser V, coming to you today to talk about racism. This was something I myself was accused of in the past when I supported the Southern Confederacy, and even if I wasn't personally racist, the Southern Confederacy did, in its nature, have some very white supremacist policies which, upon discovering these and unequivocally verifying them, ultimately led to me parting ways with the Confederacy and the Southern Cause, or whatever they call it now. When I was growing up, it was just called the Cause. My grandparents called it the Cause. So, you know, well, the cause of the survival of the South, and et cetera, preservation of its culture, what have you. In reverence for the Confederacy as, you know, whatever. I'm not here to talk about the Confederacy. This, of course, ties into the Missouri Ferguson case and Michael Brown and all of that, because it's come up, and I spoke about this before in a blog, which I will link below in the description, called "How a Catholic Monarch Handles a Race Riot," and it refers to how Richard I ended a crisis situation in the city of London during his coronation when an anti-Semitic riot broke out, and it was how he ended the problem. And not only that, he ended it in such a way that it wasn't a problem again for many hundreds of years in England. And you can read about how he did that and everything below in the description. And as for Missouri and Michael Brown, you want to know what my opinion is? I don't care. I think that it's very obvious why some people showed up to Ferguson and why others didn't. I think it's obvious what happened there was a death, and it was a tragedy. It was taken before the courts, and the courts made their decision. And I think I don't particularly care which, you know, who was innocent, who was not. I think the issue is so politicized and so tainted by, you know, democratic mob rule that we're never going to get a straight answer either way, because we can't afford to have a straight answer. I don't remember what movie it was, you know, you can't handle the truth. I think it's literally that. We couldn't handle an answer either way, you know. It's just another example of how racism is a problem in this country, and how it's become this huge problem. It was a huge problem back in the civil rights era, and we made huge legal progress to ending it. And I'm very, you know, happy for the role my own family had in that, being that my grandfather, who was a wealthy banker, was one of the few people in the state who would give loans to black people, assuming that they, you know, their papers checked out. And this was before the FDIC, when, you know, you had to give loans to people, pretty much. You know, my grandpa wouldn't give a loan to, you know, anybody if their papers didn't check out and they couldn't pay it back, you know, because he ran his bank like a business. So, you know, and, you know, my grandpa also did donate lots of money to projects not projects, but like community growth projects in poor black neighborhoods, for civic centers and things like that. And he also made several donations to churches, one in particular that I know of that is near the middle school I went to when I was a kid, and he has a little plaque that's somewhere in a box somewhere, thanking him for his massive contribution for them being able to build their new church. And, you know, it's not something we can just ignore anymore. Ferguson has shown it's not something we can just not talk about, okay? There is racism is threatening to tear this country apart. I don't care about white or black, particularly. I'm not going to sit here and say, yes, black people are still disadvantaged and, you know, have huge, you know, things in their way that are arbitrarily there and purposefully set in their path to success. I'm also not going to sit here and say, you know, black people, you know, are wrong. There is nothing standing in their way. They're perfectly equal, and we need to maintain the status quo. And I'm also not going to sit here and be like some of my family members who would definitely just side with white people on anything. I'm not going to be like that either. And the thing that puzzles me about racism and puzzled me growing up and being interested in history was particularly on the question of, because, if Greece is the mother of Western civilization, then Rome is its father. Its ideas about governance, military, law, philosophy, religion became a huge part of what guided Western civilization, from the early Middle Ages onward. It was the huge driving factor. In fact, the early Middle Ages can be described as, lots of ambitious people trying to be the new Roman Empire, and then deciding by the High Middle Ages, screw it, it's gone, let's just be our own thing. I think that's a good way to describe it. Makes sense with the Carolingians and the Byzantines and all that good stuff. So, what does Rome have to do with anything regarding racism? Well, for me, I always liked the Roman idea of citizenship, that a Roman citizen, no matter where he's from, what his status is, has certain inalienable rights that you can't take away. He is entitled, if he dies of capital punishment, if he's to be executed for capital punishment, in a way, the law is extended even to criminals. No matter what your crime is, if you're to be punished by death, you're entitled to die of beheading. Because that was seen as, that's a clean, quick death. And so, most non-citizens, slaves or whatever, would die in horrible ways. They would, dismemberment, drawing and quartering, burning alive, terrible ways to drowning, terrible ways to die. Roman citizens, one cut to the neck, and you're dead. And even then, that idea that persisted that, for the upper class of the Middle Ages, beheading was the only way to go for death sentences. It was, the only way to go. It was the dignified way to go out. And being people of high station, they deserved that. And for Romans, I was actually reading about this, it's become very frustrating on the debate among anthropologists about whether or not Egyptians are white or black, because Romans don't, in the earliest anthropological description of Romans that we can talk about really is Roman and Greek records. And for Romans, race only mattered in a descriptive sense and in an identification sense. That's an African, or that's a Hispanic. I don't know what they would call people from Hispania. Would they just call them Hispanic? I don't know. That didn't sound right, but or if somebody is, you get the idea. Race was an identifying thing, much like it is today. For identifying individuals, describing them physically. It's not racist like to say, well, okay, what's this? Okay, this Paul guy, what's he look like? Well, he's black. He's got a short hair. Okay, I got you. That's not racist to say that somebody's black. That's how Romans viewed race. It was It was identification. It was that kind of system. They didn't put a distinction between racial citizens. There was no idea that Roman citizens of various races had different rights than anybody else. If they lived in different parts of the empire, they may be governed by different laws, but overall, there was no system of racial discrimination. Now, it becomes difficult to sometimes, understand that, because, Rome did have slaves. Slaves were either criminals or conquered peoples. It was part of the Roman system of why their conquests of regions was so effective. What they would do is, with particularly troublesome regions, when they suppressed a revolt, they wouldn't just kill people. No. They would enslave everybody up from a certain age, or younger even sometimes, and they would scatter them across the empire. They would break them up. They would, say, Like, for instance, in a Gallic rebellion, in a Gallic city, they wouldn't just conquer the place and try to govern it. They would enslave everybody of fighting age. They would kill everybody who was a fighter. They'd kill every warrior and everybody involved militarily in the revolt. And they'd enslave everybody else and then scatter them to the four corners of the empire, as galley slaves, as house servants. And many of them would go on later. If you've seen the movie Ben-Hur, that did happen, where individuals in Rome would rise to prominence up from slavery by proving themselves as loyal servants to their masters, which is why Paul was telling slaves in the Roman Empire to be good to their masters and be kind to them and, be patient with them, because there were opportunities for advancement for slaves within Rome. Now, it wasn't easy, and maybe it wasn't even fair, but there was an opportunity. If there wasn't an opportunity, people wouldn't have been able to successfully do it, multiple times. So that's how Romans dealt with race, and I always liked that system where, race didn't really matter. For example, I remember once in a debate on Catholic forums, oddly enough, somebody was talking about marriage, and somebody who was a canonist was trying to argue that mixed race marriage was against the Bible. And of course, other people proved him to be wrong, and he tried to mention ancient civilizations or civilizations that would have been against the idea of mixed race marriages. And he brought up Rome, and somebody walked in and said, there is explicit mention in the legal codes of Roman governors or, consuls of Greece or other areas, I think it was Greece, stating in their law code that, I think it was the law code of Emperor Trajan actually, that there is no distinction in a legal state understood marriage between races. If it's a man and a woman, they can get married. It doesn't matter what race you are. It doesn't matter. I'm pretty sure it has something to do with Trajan, but I'm not entirely, and Greece, but I'm not entirely sure as to the specifics. And believe it or not, racism existed among European peoples as it did among African peoples, in forms of tribalism. Tribes from different areas viewed each other as just as alien and foreign as they would, two members of Gallic tribes, two different ones, would view each other as alien as they would an African just walking into their village one day, because they weren't the same. It was a primitive form of the nation state. And even in the case of the French and the Flemish, or the Britons, there was not, and not British, I mean Britons from Brittany, that little upside-down Florida thing coming off of the peninsula, coming off the north, saying it in simple terms to make you understand it, the peninsula coming off the northwestern tip of France, that's Brittany, and people that live there are called Britons. And, they all three viewed each other with intense, racially driven hatred. They hated each other. It was much the same in Slavic states, Slavic nations, and in, among Arabic tribes, and even and it was a trend that persisted into their medieval nations. It was a problem Romans had to deal with a lot when they were moving into these areas where there were already these deep-seated racial rivalries. Now, let me be clear, Romans didn't have a problem coming in and smacking people around who were of a certain, tribe because they were causing trouble, and at times they thoroughly abused their authority by going after, innocent people who may have been involved but really weren't. That's kind of nefarious, but, it works. And in a sense, I like Rome's ideas about race. Even if maybe I have it wrong or misunderstand it, I still like that idea that, citizenship transcends race. That if you're a citizen of, now, mostly, mind you, when I'm talking about race here, I'm talking about America. I understand racism is understood very differently in multiple countries and cultures around the world, and there are different issues, different problems. I understand, I met some Brazilian fans a long time ago who mentioned, there's problems, they feel with, because, Brazil had a population of slaves that was like 5 times that of its native Portuguese Brazilian populace. And when the slaves were freed, ironically enough, they revolted against the the empress that or emperor that freed them. And to this day, it's kind of felt by Brazilians and Portuguese that this section of the population causes a whole bunch of problems to the point, it's unignorable. And while I'm sure that's not a blanket case, I mean, that's what I'm saying is here that racism and racial tension is much more complicated and much different than it may be in the U.S. and than it may be, in my sphere of understanding. There may be large branching problems that I don't understand because I'm not familiar with the other countries. I can only speak from my experience in America and apply my historical and legal understanding to it. So I'm sure you're from another country and you see things differently because of your history. I understand that. Although I don't see why anybody whose country or nation, comes from the Roman tradition in some sense can't identify at least with Roman ideas about things. That's, believe it or not, sometimes Dad does know best. So going back to, the Roman idea of citizenship and how it applies to America, in America there's been this huge trend of, people tell me all the time, that America tramples on minority groups and races, and while I understand there may be people who do that, I disagree with the assertion that America as a whole does this. Nowhere else in the world, really, do you find such a confluence of culture and art and, contributions from multiple races, to the architecture and to the music of a particular people or nation. America has always been this, since we embraced the melting pot idea, has been this hotbed of different styles and different looks and different musics and different architectural styles coming together from different parts of the world. And that's one of my only favorite things about American architecture is I like looking at it and seeing how it's emulating foreign cultures and how you see different methods all kind of coming together to make something super unique and like you would never see anywhere else. And I've always really liked that. So, now let me just turn this off here. Alright, there we go. There we go. Sorry about that minor interruption. So, I really want to talk about this Roman model more and how it affects America. In America, in addition to this, racial confluence, we've always had some violent conflicts over it. And I think I've spoken before that humans are community-oriented beasts. They find something that identifies them with a group of people, and they stick with it. Or unless they find some higher purpose, and then they dedicate themselves totally to that, and they don't care about other people. That's a very rare individual, and I think even you'll find people who claim to be individualists who do identify with some kind of family unit that they go to for support, and they go to for acceptance and understanding in their daily life. It's the nature of human beings. So, I understand why sometimes fears might emerge about the foreign or the other. I'm not saying they're good. I'm saying I understand where they come from. I get human nature. It's natural for people to be distrustful of the alien and the other. If it wasn't, then the Bible would not expressly tell the Israelites, hey, this foreign guy, he comes visit you, he's lost or he's looking for a new start, be nice to him, as long as he's got to obey the law, but, be nice to him, welcome him, be good to him. That's really, if it wasn't something that happened, I don't think, we would acknowledge that it was a problem. And so we have to at least admit that these people have concerns that need to be alleviated. And I saw this one person on Tumblr make the, say, while he was even talking badly about racist sides of Tumblr, he was saying that, it's wrong to dismiss racists as unintelligent people, because if racists were all unintelligent, stupid, uneducated people, we wouldn't see governments or ideologies that were intensely and, critically and surgically thought out on the subject of race, even if they were horribly prejudiced. If all racists were dumb, we wouldn't see this level of malicious intellect, I think that was Medieval People of Color, and I like his art that he shares a lot. I believe I got a very nice triptych of St. Maurice from him. from his page. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I think I'm confusing two different ones. It's a black guy in the art. It's St. Maurice, but I think I got it from somewhere else. Oh well. I like the page. So going back again to how this applies to the U.S. and why it's important. We have these groups showing up. So what we had in the beginning of America when you had racial tensions showing up was you had advocacy groups pop up for the sole purpose of defending these people. You had things as simple as groups like Martin Luther King. What was he a part of? Southern Baptist or no? Southern Christian, Southern something. It was not Southern Poverty Law Center. No. Something that he was a part of that was a network of these civil rights leaders who were not violent, and they were just trying to convince people and change their minds about race. And they were focused on being not very violent and aggressive. And then from things to like the Black Panthers, who also are different. They're violent. They fight. I'm told that there's a difference between the Black Panthers of like the 70s and the ones they have now, but I don't know. Okay, I just know the history. I've heard the KKK, say they're different than what they were way back during the Civil Rights Movement, but I haven't seen that. Especially with Ferguson, I've heard the KKK say they're going to show up and kill rioters, and I've heard, the Black Panthers say they're going to show up and burn it all down. I don't know. Maybe it's just different groups doing what they do. And as these advocacy groups pop up, it becomes to a point, and this is why I think the genius of people like Martin Luther King initially was coming from, was that we have to change people's ideas. The human spirit is a funny thing. I had an interesting conversation with my godparents and my family about Ferguson. They all thought, and I sympathize with their ideas because I'm a draconian bastard when it comes to law and order, as you may have noticed. And I understand the desire of the human being to seek physical, violent action. They thought the rioting and the looting was out of hand, and my godmother turned to my godfather and asked, who was a National Guard vet. She looked at him and said, what I don't understand, Stephen, and his name's Steve, is if people are going to come and burn stuff down, why can't we just shoot them? And he didn't really have an answer. Maybe he said something, but anyway, because I want to keep on point. What I said was, it sounds like it's just that easy, doesn't it? And they all kind of looked at me like, what? And I said, here's the thing, okay? And it's as messed up as this is going to sound. You only use violent action if you're a government against people who can't fight back. That sounds really screwed up, doesn't it? Well, let me explain. You don't want to use violent force against your own people unless it can be decisive. You have a 100% chance of success, and nobody's going to be pissed at you for it. Because there have been plenty of cases of countries who used really harsh measures to maintain law and order were criticized by their international opponents, and that led to them losing a lot of diplomatic and economic opportunities. And don't say that can't happen to America. That can happen to America too. For instance, if we just started, cracking down on, Islam in the country to absurd degrees, the Middle East is just like, you know what, no more oil for you, no more cars, no more nothing, no oil for you, no, we're done, enjoy $17 a gallon for gas, no, we're done, goodbye. They could easily do that, and, it's an example of why the U.S. hasn't done that, because they're not in a position of strength where they can do something like that, and nobody's going to tell them they can't do it. Now, what I was telling them in short was that, the human spirit is weird. It's very weird, especially in a group. It's very finicky. It's a 50-50 chance when you use violence against somebody to intimidate them, to get what you want. They're either going to bow down before you and let you do whatever the heck it is you want, or they're going to fight back. You can burn down somebody's house and kill their whole family for going against your policy. they'll do one of two things. They'll shut up and fade into anonymity, or they will hunt you to the ends of the earth and not stop until they take at least one of your friends with them. You know, that's how the human spirit is. Human beings are fighters. We would not have become the top of the food chain if we weren't built to be warriors, to be fighters and to endure. You know, we wouldn't do that. You know, if we would not rise to the top if that was the case. Human beings wouldn't have warrior cultures if we weren't those kinds of people, where we are totally happy with responding to force with force. You know, the Vikings reveled in, you know, violence and conquest, you know, and an opponent that can actually fight back. You know, Vikings were sometimes happier when they could find a town that was defended and that would fight back against them, and sometimes if they defeated their opponents, they would offer them to become blood brothers become their blood brothers, you know, so they could, you know, join their clan and fight with them all across the world, you know, which sounds like a pretty awesome, you know, have a Viking tell you, yeah, you're pretty BA, why don't you come with us and come plunder the world, you know, and then you realize as they tell you that, they've slaughtered your family, enslaved your wife, thrown your kid off a cliff and burned your village down and robbed your church. You know, I'd be pretty hard pressed to accept a deal like that after you've wrecked my shit. So that's the thing, you know, and my godfather pointed out, you know, in Dallas, you know, they had that huge thing where all the police converged on one of these protesters that were getting pretty contentious, and they, you know, shut it down right there. Sure enough, 2 nights later, another protest shows up, and the police have to put it down again. And I wanted to print this out, and I wanted to go, you see what I'm talking about? You see what I'm talking about? Even less force than they used last night, you know? And, like, they threw the hammer down on them in Dallas the first night. You know, they brought out the big guns. And, you know, to the idea they would try and do it again, you know, I'm telling you, the human spirit, when you get a group of people riled up, if you kick that momentum just right, they will follow you into the mouth of hell and out Satan's backside. They will keep going, you know. Plenty of examples in history of people doing that. And, you know, it's what I'm telling him. I was trying to tell people, you know, violence sometimes is not the most effective answer. And there's wisdom on this, believe it or not, in the just war theory. You know, when is it permissible? What are one of the key conditions? Some of the key conditions for, you know, just war to be applicable to a situation. You have to be fighting for a right cause, but you have to have a probability of success. If you don't have a probability of using force to fix this problem, you know, you shouldn't use it. You should find another way. If overwhelming force is not going to get your opposition or fix your problem, don't try to use it anyway. Don't treat every problem like it's a nail, and the only tool you've got is a hammer. You see what I'm saying? And that's the problem I think a lot of simple people have. I'm not saying that to be insulting. You know, they're simple. They don't think about stuff like this. You know, they have simple lives. You know, they deal with simple everyday people problems, and they don't think about things like this. They don't have time to think about things like this. You know, and I'm not saying I'm super wise or anything, but I'm just saying, you know, different people, you know, they just don't think about this kind of stuff, you know? Like, I don't think about the things some people think about, you know, that kind of thing, you know? You can't just use violence to solve every problem, you know? Sometimes you come to an agreement, you know, make some kind of concession, you know? It's like, one of the things I told my godfather, you know, when he said, you know, let's just bring out the big guns and put down the rioters, I said, do you want to let one little suburb in Missouri burn, or do you want the whole state of Missouri to burn? You know? He's like, what kind of question is that? I was trying to tell him, and I said to him, the fact is, if you go for people when they're expecting and when they want a fight, then you're probably going to lose. And look, this isn't a video game. Okay? The people you're going to send to fight these people are real guys too. They have families, lives, fears, hopes, just like those people they're going to be shooting at. when I was told by somebody, of my godfather also, when I was talking to him about, I wanted to be an officer in the military, I wanted to be up there, I wanted to really be doing stuff, he said, no, believe me, when you get to that point, you don't want to be that guy. Because when people die, no matter who they are, you're the one that's writing the letter home to their parents. And that's going to hit you, and it made me think, people who are in control of soldiers, good generals don't lead an army into destruction just because it's going to listen to him. And I don't mean defeat necessarily, I mean Pyrrhic victory. A Pyrrhic victory means nothing in a long campaign. In a skirmish, in like a one-shot, one-hit wonder kind of scenario, yeah, it's fine, But in a grand scheme of things, a Pyrrhic victory is the last thing you want, because it means you've won, but you can't do it again. You can't, if you've beat a big army, but you're down to nothing, and you've lost what you were defending in the first place, but you've beaten the enemy, you might as well have lost. You may as well have just thrown the battle. You beginning to see what I'm saying? When, another good example, when do you want to storm a castle head on? No, not if you can help it. You want to camp outside the walls, burn the countryside of any kind of food they could sneak out and forage, take it all for yourself, and just let them starve to death inside their little stone coffin. You just want to let them die. You don't need to kill those soldiers that are stuck in that castle. You've got them under control. They're not going to move. They can't go anywhere. So while you've got them pinned up somewhere starving to death, you go, and if you can, and you don't need to take this fort, if they have a bunch of supplies and they can last for days and you have the artillery and the infantry capabilities, yeah, sure, take the fort. But if you can, just let them stay cooped up and go do whatever else it is you want to do. Like you got other objectives, you got other stuff you need to do in the region, you go do that. Commanders would go do that. They'll just let the enemy's main army, rot in this, stone fortress, because they can't go anywhere, And it's really fun if your artillery hits farther away than anything they've got in their little box. That's the real fun part, because then you can just shell them to death for days, and they have nowhere to go. They've got, many sieges that were won were only won because relief showed up from outside, allies, came and attacked the sieging force and drove them off. That's sometimes the only way you win sieges. Sallies almost never work, charging out of your fort to go attack them almost never works. Repelling the main attack almost never works. Because then they'll just wait for reinforcements, lick their wounds, and then come back at you with possibly more guys and way angrier than they were in the first place. And they've already had a taste of you once, so the initial shock of you, is long gone. So one point I'm saying is, we can't just handle these racial riots by violence. We got to stop the violence, yeah, but that's not the only way to handle it. And that's why people aren't using this as a first resort. It's not the most effective strategy. It's not the best way to handle it, And the fact is, there are groups, there are people who, there's an old saying, we make most of our enemies, and it's true. There was no such thing, I think, as a men's rights activist until feminists started going around with the whole third wave feminism started going around recently, like in the 2000s, with the whole, women are from Venus, men are from hell. I don't think there were many men's rights activists running around until that showed up and some people felt threatened and they overreacted. Similarly speaking, I don't think anybody in the Western world really cared about Islam until, Islamic terrorism became a thing people were concerned about until 9/11. I don't think anybody cared, really. In fact, I'd almost bet money there was nobody running around saying the things that we see now about Islam. There was nobody, below the age of 50 and not living in a trailer park somewhere that was a white supremacist until, again, people like you see on Tumblr, who are literally just like kill whitey, and, white people are literally the worst thing that ever happened to anything ever, they destroy cultures and, all this other stuff. These people have created their own opposition, And that's a terrible thing to do in politics. That's a terrible thing to do in any situation. You don't want to make enemies. You want to win people to your ideas. You don't want to inflame people. That's just stupid. You know, where possible, you should avoid offending people. You should avoid angering them directly, and you should talk it out. You should have some kind of mutual understanding, some kind of mutual agreement, If your enemy is not in such a position that he is forcing you to fight or bringing the fight to you, why are you trying to start a fight? I understand. You want to pick a fight, fine, pick a fight, But I'm just saying, for me personally, that seems like as a student of history, that seems like a dumb idea. Now I wanted to counter very briefly people who say that we should just, in regards to racism, let's just use the violent method. Let's just, put down these rebellions when they show up and ignore the underlying causes. You, sir, are a moron. I don't mean just, I forgot my car keys in my car and my car's running on the storm. No, you are grade A, should not be allowed to handle sharp objects, stupid. Do you have any idea how many great empires and nations and dynasties have been ruined on that philosophy? People who thought it's not a problem until they shoot at us first? Do you have any idea how many great nations have been torn apart by this? The people didn't address these problems until they were right on their front doorstep, even if they could see them approaching in the distance. That is how empires die. That is how multicultural, multinational alliances go to shit. That's just right there on the first page, of why these things happen. That's why Rome fell. They didn't fix the problems they were having, and blamed it on other factors without actually fixing it. They tossed blame around, but they didn't take action to fix it. It's the equivalent to that. So, no, we can't just put down race riots on a case-by-case basis, because, again, and going back to what I said before, you're not just sending mindless soldiers, mindless killing machines out to go fight. You're sending, some of these guys may be hard-boiled, hard-charging, combat vets who don't care, would shoot anything, if their commanding officers tell them to do it, and will face any problem and any challenge. But do you really want to waste guys like that on something like this when you have plenty of foreign enemies that you could save them for? Come on. And moreover, you do realize that it's not just going to be a simple matter of mowing down unarmed civilians, right? People are going to fight back. Soldiers are not superhuman. They can die from, getting stabbed in the face in a dark corridor just as much as I can without any body armor on. They can get burned to death. They can, get shot. You don't need military-grade equipment to kill a soldier. You need, what do you need to kill a soldier? You need the stuff you would use to kill a man. Now, his training and his equipment gives him an edge, but he's a human being. He's a sack of meat just like you. He's just as squishy as you are underneath all that. His only advantage is training and potentially equipment. And even then, if the training and discipline stuck, those are his only advantages. And asymmetrical warfare has been the death of a lot of modernized, disciplined armies. Asymmetrical warfare has been a meat grinder for even the U.S. in some cases. So, do we really want to waste our... I don't think people understand. Do you realize how close the United States of America came to not existing during the Civil War? Do you know how many other nations were lining up to partition the United States of America as it existed in the 19th century? How many nations were starting to kind of be like, yeah, I like the Confederacy. No, I like the Union. And they did that not based on any moral reason. Most of these people could have cared less about the question of slavery or what have you. They could have cared less. What they cared about was their own geopolitical and economic interests. All they saw in America was a bunch of colonies waiting to be carved to pieces. Do you understand how close we came to being ended to cease to be an independent sovereign power? Do you really want to try that now? Do you want to try that now that China is leading us, is outstripping us in, production and very nearly setting itself up to become the next economic superpower? Do you want to do that now in the face of a caliphate rising in the Middle East? Do you want to do that now in the face of a militant Russia that is very popular with some conservative groups? Do you really want to do that right now? I don't. I think that's a profoundly stupid thing to do. You got to know when to fold them and when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them, when to hold them. You got to know when to do things like this. Now is not the time. Almost never is a good time to have a civil war unless you can end it in a couple of days or you just can't avoid it. It's almost never a good idea. So, yeah, I think I've dismissed pretty much any stupid allusions to the idea that we can just violently deal with these problems. I've completely ignored moral implications, on purpose, just to give you some brain food as to why this is a profoundly stupid idea. So I want to move on more to what my idea is in terms of citizenship and why I think it's important and why it can be useful to the United States and to countries in general today in dealing with the issue of racial problems. Referring to the Roman idea of citizenship. Now, I want you to keep in mind that Rome was an empire. It kept the vestiges of a republic and even the Senate, but de facto and technically de jure, it was an empire. It was a monarchy, with a monarch in the place of the imperator or the emperor. As have most all countries been who successfully dealt with racial issues without so much as firing a single shot. They had a central leading figure and a central state figure, not necessarily a centralized state, but a state figure, like a king or a monarch, they could rally behind and all say, our allegiance to this guy, to this thing, or whether it be a monarch or even religion, is what binds us together, and we have to stay strong and united to accomplish great things. That's the key thing that always sets these empires that overcome racial prejudice apart from other nations who failed to do so. And the track record on democracies and republics successfully solving racial tension is not good. Usually what happens is sides jostle for power in the voting ranks and, worry about, birth rates and things like that, oh, how many black people are there? Oh, how many white people are there? How many Asian people are there? These kind of things, the things they worry about because that's voting blocks, things they can manipulate to maintain power. It becomes a survival of the fittest, a Darwinian type thing, and that's very close to what we're getting to at this point. It's the sheer problem of the fact that every single black person will vote for a black president regardless of what they think, what his policies may or may not be, and the idea that white people will vote for a white president no matter what his policies may or may not be, already sets up, the republic has failed if that is going to become the modus operandi of the voters. It's over. It's done. You failed. It's now some kind of democratic racial oligarchy. I don't even know what to call it. It's just not good. So I stand by what I believe, that monarchy is the best thing for the U.S. and for any country in general. So if a country wants to succeed, a good, stable, feudal-inspired monarchy is the best thing. So if you want to implement something like this, you need something like that, or you need a strong central figure. For Americans, I think it would just be good enough to be America, rediscovering our history, rediscovering our roots, rediscovering what binds us together, and working off of that. I think that alone may be strong enough to bring America back together. We have all this Walmart patriotism these days, but real patriotism, real love for country may actually, be able to bring Americans together. And if not, you may want to try that Royalist Revolution thing. More on that later. So, how would I fix the problem, or how do I suggest we go about fixing this problem? Well, we need to enshrine something in our legal law code, even if it's already this way, technically speaking. We need to enshrine in our law code the idea of American citizenship. And and that sounds like a stupid thing to say, but what do I mean by that? I mean that every single citizen of the United States of America, regardless of his age, his wealth, his race, his creed, has inalienable rights that cannot be taken away from him under any circumstances. What are some of these rights? Right to employment, right to personal property, right to religious choice, right, choosing their religion. I still prefer, Catholicism being the state religion, or the preferred religion of the state, or at least the religion that has the support of the state. But I'm talking about America here, as we see it now. The guarantees, for things like Social Security or, welfare benefits, for when they're injured on the job or something, things that nothing can take away, that are written in stone, unless you break the law, unless you commit a crime that you are, 100%, you are guilty. Then according to the crime you've committed, like, I'm not saying we take away your right to free speech for jaywalking. I'm saying, like, if you've committed murder or fraud, like you committed fraud, maybe you shouldn't be allowed to work in any major banking institutions. See what I'm saying? Things like that. I think that's something we need to consider. Unrehabilitated criminals and uncorrected criminals don't need to, have the same rights as, responsible, law-abiding citizens. I think that's just common sense. Rehabilitated, normal members of society who have criminal past, that's something different. When it comes to, treatment by police, things like that, there needs to be a clear understanding that, according to the law and by practice, everybody is an equal person. Race is still a quantifier in terms of identification and things like that. Obviously, that you can't take away that. That would just cause chaos. But you do have to make it to the point that the first thing people feel about being a person, if they're an American citizen, is that they are an American. That is their first identifier, and that's how they connect to other people of their nation, is that they are all Americans. That's our identifier. We stand together. We stand shoulder to shoulder, in good times and bad. We are all in this together. It's us versus the world, Americans love the underdog. I can see why that would really take off, They love the one guy against, they love the, rebel without a cause, one man against the world in our stories, I think that would be, very popular. We have to have a resurgence in patriotic art and, literature and history and study and appreciation, and, find things we could all be proud of and we can all feel good about. We need to start, tearing down the walls that divide us still along these lines of old hatreds and old grudges that are no longer relevant to the modern age. Now, in places where these things are still felt, we do need to try to fix that, but we also have to understand something very important that we have to, understand, is that there's no pleasing some people. Some people, if you apologize to them, if you bent over to bow before them and do everything they asked of you, they take the opportunity to stick a knife in your back and cut you wide open from pelvis to head. And by head I mean your skull. Clean your mind. They don't care. They're never going to like what you do to them. People who profiteer off of racial discrimination, are not going to want racial discrimination to end. The KKK is not going to want ignorant white people to stop feeling oppressed because there's a black president. Some, people who, are going to, make money lecturing on, how, the civil rights movement was a failure and, or whatever, and, it's still not enough, are not going to want black people to stop feeling threatened by the white man, people who, do things like cop block are not going to want people to stop being afraid of the police. Traditional Catholic editorialists are not going to want people to suddenly like Pope Francis, because then they can't make money selling their publications because nobody will want to read them. Do you see what I'm saying? You got to sort those people out. The people who can be convinced and can be talked to and can, be made to reach understanding, from the people who just want to cause trouble. Who literally, they're mischief makers. They want to cause trouble. They profit from chaos. They profit from division. They profit by manipulating this. They are not going to want that to go away. People who gain power from it, influence from it, importance from it, and are not magnanimous at heart are not going to want racial discrimination to go away. And that's the sad truth of it. They're not going to want to just step down and fade away forever into obscurity and into the pages of history. They want it to keep going as long as they're alive, because that's their legacy, and that is how they make their money and make their living. And, I think you can talk to anybody. If I could make a living talking for the rest of my life about things I like to talk about, hey, sign me up. I'd do it. So it's just, it's that. It's like that. That's the way it is. So the other thing we have to try to work on is identifying, what makes an American an American. We have to really, we have to fix our court system. We have to make it so people feel like that is the case, that, this Declaration of the Rights of Every American Citizen is not just so much smoke, and hot air. It actually has legal weight to it. We have to do that. If you fail to do that, then, if you fail to do that, then, it is going to seem like that, just that. It's going to seem like hot air. It's going to seem like it doesn't matter. It's going to seem like, it doesn't exist. You have to make it so people feel that way. I don't think it's a smart idea necessarily to outright disband legally, racially aligned parties, because, then you will create the idea that they're oppressed, and you will create the idea that, that they are under attack. Maybe if you did it in such a way that everybody at once was getting the same treatment and being shut down completely, there will be no more racially based parties or political organizations that are based solely along this. If you do that, maybe then it would work. But I don't know. That's a very complex thing. That's a very controversial thing to suggest. I would like to say, yeah, let's just do it. Let's tear down the walls that divide us. But, for many people, that will feel like that they're losing their identity and it's being taken away from them. I feel like adding race into the mix of political issues, makes it too one-sided. We stop focusing on the person behind the skin tone. We don't focus on the person behind the face. We don't care about the policies. We just don't want the other guy, the outsider, to have any say. We don't want to hear what they have to say. We don't want them to have power or influence. If you just in one fell swoop, disbanded all of them officially, ended the lobbying and the influencing, then you're onto something. All the while, the government has to take the place of the arbiter in race relations. They have to establish the even playing field, and they have to establish the basic core of, the idea that everybody in the eyes of the state is equal. Racially speaking, everybody is an American citizen. We don't identify you based on race. And you are our citizens, our people, our subjects. That is how we identify you, and that is how we care about you. And as citizens, you are entitled to the same rights and privileges and, obedience to the same laws as every other American citizen. That is how we have to do it. We have to base it, off the Roman model to some extent and modify it for our own times. We have to make it understood that, racially speaking, everybody is equal according to citizenship, because I feel like until you do that, we're going to keep having these problems where racial division tears the country apart. if we keep on the course we're going now, I can only see it going the way of these racial parties and groups, becoming increasingly divided and increasingly bitter against one another, to the point it's an unsalvageable situation. And no peaceful resolution is going to affect anything. People are just going to keep fighting. So, in short, we have to just make it that the citizen is the moniker, not white American, not black American, not Irish American, not Asian American, not Mexican American, just American. If you're an American citizen, that comes first. That doesn't, it comes above racial, ideas, because, if you think about it, racism is just, Kinnism is just barbaric, Human races don't operate on a hive mind. People in a nation don't operate on a hive mind. All white people and all black people don't think, within their respective, races, don't think the same. All white people don't like Starbucks. All black people don't eat fried chicken. All Asian people aren't good at math. These stereotypes are just wrong, It's ridiculous to think that they are. It shows it's primitive. It's downright caveman-like. It's just stupid. This fear of the other, when they're as much a human being as you and me. So I think that's a good starting point for fixing, race relations in America. I think that is a good general place to start. We have to identify with each other and with ourselves as Americans first. We have to identify as proud, we have to identify with ourselves as proud sharers in a mutual heritage as Americans. And, people who come here need to understand, that you're coming here to be a part of us. Welcome. You are being welcomed into the greatest brotherhood on the planet. You are being welcomed, you have been deemed worthy of the honor of becoming an American citizen. You are joining one of the, land of the free, home of the brave. You are becoming a huge part of what makes this country so great, is the multitude of groups of people coming together under the same flag in the same land to work together and to thrive together and to make something that nobody has ever seen before. That is, if we can make it like that, it's not just about coming to find work. It's not just about economic, advantage. It's not just about political asylum. It's about committing yourself to something above what anything you've heard before. It's about becoming, the sharer in a legacy, and to everybody who comes to America, everybody who lives in America should be made to understand the sacrifices and the hardship that was endured by people who built for them what they have now. The conquest and the inventions and the hard work, beating back Mother Nature, and all her ferocity, architectural achievement, intellectual wisdom, religious faith, all these things kind of, maybe when I speak of religious faith, I'm biased towards Catholicism, but, Catholicism played a big role in America. Going all the way back to the Revolution, if we can make people understand it in that sense, we may change America completely, forever. We may become something truly above ourselves, That's really, in a sense, what tradition is all about, what high culture is all about. Elevating people to something higher than anything they've ever experienced or ever felt before. And that's why I'm a traditionalist, in a sense. I advocate for Western high culture. It doesn't just confirm truths about life. It raises you higher to consider things you never thought of before. And to me, that's really why I believe this idea has merit and why it could work. Because with Americans and with, us, we really don't have a choice in finding a way to overcome this. We really don't. America has one of two futures. Well, maybe three. The first future is that we fall apart. Our own laziness and apathy combined with the vindictiveness and spite of other groups, becomes too much. It breaks down. There's nothing to keep us from not just killing each other anymore. Somebody sets something off and boom, it's all over. It's all downhill from there. And, we don't just fall apart, okay? Other nations are going to come in and they're going to fight over us. And by over us, I mean literally they're going to walk over us and ignore us. And they're going to fight. And we're going to be caught in the middle. You're going to have three kinds of people in this scenario. You're going to have people who take one side or the other. You're going to have people who benefit from both by playing mercenaries or playing, the merchant, the arms merchant. And you're going to have people that are just caught in the middle. The helpless, the infirm, the weak, the meek. They're going to be caught in the middle to be slaves by whoever happens to wave a banner above them the highest. It's going to be a terrible future. Russia will take Alaska. Mexico's going to take southwestern America. Canada's going to take the northwest and the Midwest, or the Midwest will go on neutral ground. Canada and Spain. Hell, Spain may want Florida and Cuba. The UK may want New England back. And it may not even be these nations specifically that want these things back. It may just be people saying, hey, let's go join these guys' sides now. It may not even be foreign armies invading. It may be these nations planting agents into these countries and saying, hey, let's go join these guys who used to own us before America was a thing. And it's going to become chaos. It may not even be those nations involved. Maybe totally different nations. Maybe just China and Russia, just same two big superpowers I can think of that are like on America's playing field. On America's, game, We are really, that is a future. And if you don't think that's a future we can have, ask any of the Balkans, ask, the Ukraine, ask Poland what it's like to become, divided and, leaderless. Ask what it's like to them. Ask them how it feels. It's terrible. It's not a future that you or I want. The second outcome is that we just stagnate. Nobody cares enough to come invade us, so we just die. In essence, we just collapse. We fall apart from within. We just fade away into lawlessness because the courts have, just gotten so bad. Nobody respects what they anymore. Policemen wave their guns around and people laugh. It becomes to the point nobody respects the rule of law anymore. It just becomes sheer absolute chaos. Sorry. I had dinner earlier. Mexican food. It just becomes... It'll become a state of absolute chaos. Nobody will come for us because nobody wants the trouble of dealing with us. We'll just fade away into little tribal state dominions and sporadic outbursts of warfare, and we'll just die. We'll just slowly die. But there's a third option. The third option is we endure. The third option is we go the way of the Roman Republic. When they were slowly starting to fracture, when things were looking really, I suppose down, like Rome was never going to get any better, a new age dawns. A new leader emerges and leads people to victory. But we have to be careful what kind of leader that is. We don't want someone like Adolf Hitler. We need someone like Julius Caesar, somebody, like Charles V, somebody, who really has the best in mind. I would support a Catholic monarchy, personally. But, that's just me. I place the spiritual above the temporal. I'm sure for other people it's not such a complicated issue. That's what we have to do. We have to put, we have to have we may not even need a monarchy yet. We have to come together as Americans and embrace these ideas and save ourselves. Save what we have built. Save our home. That may be the only thing to do. you know, and just, you know, through these ideas that America is something good and great that deserves to survive and has things to contribute, and that we won't let our nation that we built go quietly or, you know, be conquered, that may be the only thing that saves us. You know, if we take that, we can truly not just survive, we can thrive, we can triumph over our divisions and our problems, we can endure, we can become something really great. But that won't happen if we don't overcome something so fundamentally simple that an empire that existed 2,000 years ago could find a way around it.